You probably, there you go. And now we are recording. So thank you all so much for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn about the community impacts of the fertilizer pollution cycle. As I just mentioned, we are recording this event and we will share it with everyone who registered through our Zoom registration page. So if you want to share with someone else or relive this awesome event later, we'll make sure you have the info for that. My name is Maisa Khan. Maisa rhymes with Nisa, Nisa Maisa. I am the policy director for the Mississippi River Network. I am based out of St. Louis, Missouri, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Illini, indigenous people, and many other Native communities. For friends who are joining us today who aren't familiar with the Mississippi River Network, or MRN, we are a coalition of nearly 60 nonprofit organizations and businesses, all working together to protect the land, water, wildlife, and people of our greatest river, the Mississippi. MRN implements the only national public program of its kind dedicated to the river, our One Mississippi program. One Mississippi is our national public program that is designed to educate, engage, and inspire people to take action to protect the Mississippi River. If you aren't already a river citizen, we'd love for you to join us. By signing up as a river citizen, you can show your commitment to the river and you can be involved in actions that help protect it. So the Mississippi River Network members implement this One Mississippi program locally all along the river. And since 2009, our One Mississippi program has recruited 20,000 river citizens like you and inspired thousands of actions. So as I said, our river citizens are people who want to clean up, restore, and protect our country's greatest river. We say, whether you are in your armchair or wading boots, river citizens are people who protect the river by speaking up on its behalf and caring for it in simple, everyday ways that make a big difference. Together, we can protect the river for future generations. So we hope you will take that first step and sign up and join us as a river citizen today. You can visit onemississippi.org. You'll see that there in the slide, and I'm pasting it in the chat right there. Oh, one more did it. Amazing. Thank you all. Teamwork makes the dream work. That's beautiful. As we're all here today as part of our River Days of Action, as you probably saw in the title and when you registered, this is part of a series of events that started last Thursday on June 10th and will continue through this weekend and end on June 20th. We hope you'll check out the other 40 plus events that are happening in person and virtually from the headwaters to the Gulf, all 10 main stem river states and all across the country. You can find the full event schedule on our website, again, onemississippi.org. And since you all are here lunching and learning, if you don't have lunch plans for tomorrow or Thursday, we also have a lunch and learn talk on both of those days as well. So check out our website and sign up for some events. So we have this River Days of Action. We have events that are taking place, and we have one exciting unifying action that brings all of our River Days of Actions together. And that is about supporting a new vision for our Mississippi River that focuses on restoration, resilience, and equity. And I'm gonna share in the chat here a link to that petition. If you care about the Mississippi River, if you see a new vision for our river that focuses on restoration, resilience, and equity, we need your help. Please take a moment now to sign this action that's weaving all of our River Days of Action events together. And by signing this petition, you can take a moment and read through it, but I'll just let you know verbally that by signing this petition, you're joining us, supporting this new vision for the river that focuses on restoration, resilience, and equity, and it works in 4 specific areas, and that is improving water quality, restoring habitat and natural systems, eliminating aquatic invasive species, and 4th, building local resilience to natural disasters. All of this while prioritizing investments in communities of color and economically disadvantaged communities. So we hope you'll take the time to read through that petition, join us, sign it, and we're here today to learn more about some of the issues that are facing our river. So if you'd like to wait and sign at the end, that works too. I'll just flag now that there are a couple of different ways that you can sign and share this public petition. So the first is to visit the short link, that's bit.ly/MRN public petition, also in the chat there. You are also, if you want to be part of a technologically advanced future, you can pull out your smartphone, open your smartphone's camera, and just focus it on this QR code that you see here, and you should receive a little like bubble that pops up that'll take you directly to the link to the petition. And of course, if either of those don't suit you, if you're already cruising along on our onemississippi.org website, you can also navigate to the petition there. So finally, I'm really excited to turn it over to my wonderful moderator here with us to talk about, as I said, one of the issues that we're hoping we can tackle just to learn more about the fertilizer pollution cycle. So with that, Pat, I will kick it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you. Where am I at? I'm Pat Nunnally from the University of Minnesota, and I'm on the steering committee of the Mississippi River Network. I'm in Minnesota, where it's the ancestral land of Dakota people. I work with Dakota people, and they've taught me, I will pronounce this badly, and I apologize in advance for mispronouncing, Makoche Kinde Dakota Tamakoche, which means in this place where I am, Dakota and the land belong to each other. We'll start off today with Matt Rhoda from Healthy Gulf. I'll put websites of the various speakers in the chat as we go forward, and we'll have Matt talk about a story map that he and some others have developed, and then the other panelists will respond to what they see and talk about how their own work is addressing water quality in the Delta. I will not be stopping and interrupting them for introductions and so forth, but I'll call their name out and then they can go, they'll know that they're next. We will hopefully have time for questions. So I encourage you to use the chat thread or to raise your hand. There's a raise hand function. And in the interest of time, we just can't have people just sort of stopping and boarding out questions because we don't get, through the things that people want to say. As Misa said, the session is being recorded. It may be posted in the future on the One Mississippi website, as well as be made available to people who signed up for our program today. So, Matt, it's all yours.
All right. Give me a thumbs up if you can see the screen that says first to death. Good deal. And obviously you can hear me since you gave me a thumbs up. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Misa. I'm really excited to be here. Been a huge supporter of Mississippi River Network for, 15 years or so, basically since they were incepted. And my name is Matt Rhoda. I am the Senior Policy Director for Healthy Gulf. We're an environmental advocacy organization based in New Orleans, focused on working with communities to ensure that we are using the best science and the best advocacy to push for healthy communities that depend upon the Gulf, Florida through Texas, and then all the way up the Mississippi River too, because we're kind of the endpoint of the the largest river in the country, and we drain 42% of the United States, from headwaters down to the Gulf. And one of the issues that we really deal with is the fertilizer pollution that flows down the Mississippi River and from other areas. So what I'm going to do today is just take, I don't know, like 15 minutes to go over a tool that I put together with an amazing amount of help from Rebecca Malpass, who is also on the call here, to really look at this cycle, what we're, this fertilizer pollution cycle, and how many times it impacts the Gulf and how it impacts people differently in communities throughout the basin. Because EPA says that nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizer, also known as nutrient fertilizer, is one of the biggest pollution issues in the country. And regretfully, we've known that for a long time, and we, as a nation, as states, as local communities, really haven't done much to protect our communities, protect our drinking water, protect our wildlife, protect our waters, fresh and oceanic waters. And so we put together this project, this tool for people to use to really get an idea of what this whole cycle looks like. And I'll post this in a little bit, or somebody can post it now if they want. But if you want to take a look at this, you can go to healthygulf.org/fertilized-to-death, and that'll take you to this story map, because this is a very interactive thing I'm going to be presenting to you today. But there's so much more in this than I have time to go over in 20 minutes. And it's really intended to get people to be able to dig in and play with it, interact with it. So. But I'm going to give you an overview today, and then I'm looking forward to the conversation afterwards. So to start off, I just want to talk a little bit about the cycle that I'm talking about. So at the beginning of this, there is a little movie, and I'll be narrating it here for us. So we have the Mississippi River. You can see that out there. And so let's just start. So phosphate, it's mined in areas of Florida, also Montana, Idaho, and they are mining this phosphate for fertilizer, and they make these huge piles of tailings. Also, nitrogen phosphorus is made out of natural gas, which a lot of it is fracked from the United States, but also through the Gulf of Mexico. It is drilled, causing lots of pollution problems. It's fracked. Again, I have this just in Texas because I'm talking about the Gulf, but as we know, fracking comes from all over the country. And so a lot of people don't realize that the nitrogen fertilizer we use actually comes from natural gas. These raw materials are shipped to fertilizer plants in Florida, Texas, Louisiana, and they make their own problems, including these massive piles of phosphogypsum waste, which can be radioactive. Then we ship that fertilizer up to the Midwest, and it runs off and it pollutes our local waters and causes lots of different issues. Here's we've increased our fertilizer use, especially since we learned how to make this synthetic fertilizer. It can cause pet deaths due to harmful algae blooms. It can really impact our communities, and then finally comes back down to the Gulf and causes the Gulf dead zone, this area where there's so much, the oxygen is used up in the water due to algae blooms, kills things that can't swim away. And the area is estimated to be about 3 times the size of Rhode Island this year, gets up to about the size of New Jersey, depending on the year and winds and things like that. So that's just a very basic overview, and I encourage people to use this link to this just to give people an idea of just how this cycle works. And especially with the Gulf, it starts cradle to grave. We're feeling the impacts every step of the way. So now we're going to take a closer look. So I have that beginning thing, but then we are moving into this map, this interactive map. So like I said, phosphate is mined, and that is, we use that to make phosphorus fertilizer. And a lot of that phosphate is mined in Florida, Gulf state. And here, a lot near Tampa. Can you all see my mouse? Okay, great. And then here, and you can see that you can click on any of these, and you can get a little information about these different areas, how big they are, where they are. It's mined. They have all these tailings, you know, bear in mind that this phosphate, even at this level, can start causing these toxic algae blooms, start contributing to red tides. Speaking of red tides, this is also throughout this tool, you can click on all these fun little things with little pluses that tell you and show you. So we have these phosphate mines, and the runoff contributes to red tides, which are a form of algae bloom that can cause respiratory illnesses. A few years ago, they had a massive one, and this year they're actually seeing it already in Tampa Bay, which we almost never see, due to or at least exacerbated by a potentially catastrophic failure of one of these phosphogypsum stacks, which I'll talk about in a little bit, just flowing polluted radioactive water into the bay. But these mines, they're often built in sinkholes. This mine right up here, they're currently proposing to expand it in specific areas where sinkholes have already happened. So allowing this polluted water to get straight into people's drinking water. And it impacts endangered species too. We have the Florida panther and the oval pigtoe mussel are around these areas where they mine in Florida. And like I said, natural gas, here is a network of all the oil and gas pipelines that go through the Gulf. And we use this causes water pollution, air pollution, climate pollution as we move forward. Here's just, if you want a different perspective, here it is. Here are all the wells that have been drilled in the, you know, literally thousands of wells. But as we know, in the past couple decades, fracking has become a lot more pervasive as well, which has really increased the amount of natural gas, and by that we have methane leaks, explosions, all of those things that really contribute to it. And here are all of the oil and gas wells in the Gulf area. I didn't do the whole country because if I did, it would take like 6 to 10 minutes to just load up all of these little dots. You know, we're talking about thousands and thousands of these wells. And then they're shipped via this national network of pipelines all over the country. And as you can see, you know, being in the Gulf, you know, we're in the epicenter of this. And and some of that natural gas is shipped to fertilizer plants where nitrogen fertilizer is made. So here are the fertilizer plants around the country. And with this tool, you can take a look at what so we have nitrogen and phosphorus plants, also potash. I think we have like 2 in the country, and not really focusing much on that, but I think there's one right here. Yeah, there's the mosaic potash. But again, you can see a lot of concentration in the Gulf, but then these are a lot more distributed and feeding all the farms around the country. So when they make this fertilizer, it's going to cause pollution. And one form of this pollution that we're really looking at right now is phosphorus. Is these phosphogypsum stacks, they call them. Basically, it's a big mountain of radioactive toxic waste that is a byproduct of creating the phosphorus fertilizer. And these gyp stacks are located around where these production plants are. You can see Houston, Florida, Louisiana, and these areas these gyp stacks, they're radioactive. They have uranium, radium in them, and we really don't know what to do with them. It's because it's radioactive waste, and so once we produce this pollution, it's going to sit there, and then we just need to figure out how to deal with it like any other radioactive pollution. One area that I want to particularly draw people's attention to is, given that we're talking about the Mississippi River here, is Cancer Alley. This is the area between basically between Baton Rouge down to the mouth of the Mississippi River, where there is a massive concentration of industrial and chemical facilities, and where we have nitrogen production, phosphorus production, all happen in these areas. This is just to give you a general idea of how many toxic discharges we have in this area. You know, millions and millions of pounds of toxic pollutants are being discharged into the Mississippi River. That's one reason why a lot of these places are located along the Mississippi River, is because the Mississippi River is so big, we feel like, or regulations, it's like, well, it's so big, we can dump our waste in there and it'll get diluted enough to not be a problem, or at least that's the thinking. But it impacts these communities, and we're working with them to try to fight new facilities and try to ramp down the pollution of existing pollution, and nitrogen phosphorus pollution really plays a role into that. So then we finally have the pollution. We have the pollution created. We have the fertilizer created, and it gets applied. And corn is a crop that takes a lot of fertilizer, especially nitrogen fertilizer, and because corn is is very leaky in that it doesn't take up all that nitrogen. So a lot of that nitrogen, where it would be useful to the plant, becomes pollution as it goes into the groundwater and flows off in ditches, streams, into the Mississippi River, and eventually back down to the Gulf of Mexico. So this is just a slide here showing you the percentage of ag lands that are in corn. And, you know, this area up here known as the Corn Belt, and you can see it right there. And that's where a lot of the pollution that, you know, as if the Gulf hadn't been polluted enough, you know, you get it from the phosphate mines, you get it from the drilling for natural gas, you get it from the production of nitrogen pollution and the ammonia that is created, you get it from the phosphorus pollution. And it goes down, but before it even gets to the Gulf, it impacts local waters. These are just a list of all, excuse me, a map of all the impaired waters throughout the United States. And again, nitrogen and phosphorus pollution is one of the leading causes of impairments for waterways throughout the country. This causes algae blooms, toxic algae blooms, where you have toxins like cyanotoxins that are caused by, is basically, you know, fertilizer that goes into the pollution that goes into the water is still fertilizer, and it causes plant growth, but then it causes this algae growth, this unnatural algae growth. And the more fertilizer you put in and the warmer it gets, the more chance you're going to have toxic algae blooms that can cause, you know, at extreme, they can cause pet deaths, can cause livestock deaths. And here's just a snapshot of some EPA data of these algae toxins that have been located throughout the country. So this is a widespread issue, like so many others. But you see a lot of those red dots where you have really high levels within the Mississippi River Basin. But it also gets into the groundwater, and nitrogen is particularly problematic when it gets into the groundwater, especially at high levels. And here's a map of let me see, I'm gonna get this so you can see a little bit better. There you go. Of the percentage of the groundwater that is contaminated with nitrates. Nitrates have been linked to different diseases, colorectal cancer, and most notably, or kind of thing it's best known for, is blue baby syndrome, where if the nitrate levels are higher than 10 milligrams per liter, it can cause problems in infants and young children where their blood can't take up the right amount of oxygen. So their skin actually turns a little blue because they aren't getting the oxygen that they need. And again, you can see in here, Mississippi River states are not doing real well when it comes to this kind of pollution. I grew up in Southern Illinois. My house was surrounded by cornfields, and we didn't drink our well water. And I never knew why, but we always got the water from my parents' house, or from my grandparents' house who lived in town. And it wasn't until I started doing this work, it's like, oh, it's because of the nitrate pollution. Because my parents always said, oh, well, kids aren't supposed to drink it, so nobody's going to drink it, right? Finally, getting down here to the Gulf where I am. This nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizer comes down to the Gulf and causes this pollution where you have these massive algae blooms. And the algae blooms, it dies, it sinks down to the bottom, and bacteria come in and eat up all that dead algae, and that causes this massive area that gets the biggest in the summer, where sea life needs to swim away or it'll suffocate. Here's a little picture of just kind of that process that happens. And this is kind of, we've been working on this. They've been monitoring the size of the dead zone since 1985. And we've only basically seen it get bigger. Even though EPA has, they developed a task force for this about 20 years ago, 2 decades later, and we're still seeing a massive dead zone. We're about 3 times the size of what the goal should be. And one of the reasons is because we fully rely on voluntary measures to try to address this problem, trying to basically counting on people to do a good thing without having a basic bottom line. You need to have a basic idea of like everybody should be going up to at least this standard. And then, yes, people can do better beyond that, but we don't even have that. So I don't want to take up any more time, but please take some time, not while everybody's talking, because you shouldn't be, playing on your computer while people are talking. But if you want to learn more about these things, after that interactive map, we go into so much more detail about red tides, about the radium pollution, about toxic algae blooms, about natural gas drilling, fracking, all of that kind of stuff, getting into the dead zone. So I am just scratching the surface of this. So I really do encourage people to take a real good look at this if you have the time. And, you can feel free to, if you have any questions or feedback, you can shoot me an email at matt@healthygulf.org. I look forward to your questions. I'm so excited to hear from all the other panelists, and thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Matt. We'll put up a reaction of the clapping hand. There we go. Just to keep things lively and interesting, I thought we would go in reverse order, or in order by first name. So next would be Kathy Hawes from the Tennessee Clean Water Network. Kathy?
Pat, I believe Kathy isn't able to join us, so we won't hear from Kathy today.
Okay. Mark Davis from Tulane.
Well,
Mark wears many hats, but I'll put one particular website up from the Tulane Institute on Water Resources and Policy.
Thank you, Pat. And Matt, once again, you thoroughly depressed me. But you've been doing that to me for a long time. My own involvement with nutrients, and particularly the hypoxic issue in the dead zone, goes back into, about 1995, when efforts were first being drawn to the connections between river pollution and that hypoxic dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And at that point, there was literally no one other than a handful of scientists and activists and fishers who were, pointing out that this was a problem and that the river was involved. Indeed, EPA was fairly certain that the river wasn't the cause. They had kind of, whatever was in the river was not causing these problems. They were fairly certain that a lot of it was atmospheric. It was only when university scientists and USGS scientists were brought together with EPA in a public forum that the dots were connected, which tells you the importance of networks like Mississippi River Network. Never ever assume that people with knowledge are talking to other people with knowledge, particularly people who have authority. It's your job, because it's no one else's, to help make that possible. And that is the only reason we had, the hypoxia task force, or the Mississippi River Gulf of Mexico Nutrient Reduction Task Force, and which has produced, quote, an action plan, which has resulted in, if the actions was supposed to be innumerable meetings, it's a success. If the actions were supposed to lead to nutrient reductions, it has not. And indeed, it's a matter of personal embarrassment for me and several others who were involved in starting it, that it has done so little. So I'm really glad to see this getting the focus, and also getting the focus that it is not just, the Gulf of Mexico. It is not just hypoxia. I mean, my work is really around water, and the implications for drinking water, public health, and the cycle that leads from community to community and then back, I think really needs to be understood, because all of this is linked into things like farm policy, energy policy, the fact that we're now using these fertilizers to grow corn, to supplement gasolines, that was based on some energy policy, assumptions from decades ago, which were questionable then. But we're still doing it, in part because it's now become essentially an ag subsidy. So I really, I commend Matt for putting together this in story form, because the simple fact is things don't get better until it's someone's job to make it better. And right now, it is no one's job to make this situation better. It may be someone's job to do part of it in Iowa, someone's job to do part of it in Minnesota, part of it, somewhere else. But by and large, until there is something that pulls them together. And Healthy Gulf that Matt worked with, tried once to get a federal judge to set a TMDL for nutrients. And quite frankly, the judge said, well, one day I may have to do that, but this isn't that day. We're going to continue to let EPA, pursue voluntary measures. I can promise you that won't happen. But more importantly, I think that we shouldn't wait for a court or EPA to figure out what those metrics ought to be. One of the problems we have is if you were to ask almost anyone in a position of authority, how clean does this river need to be? And by this river, I mean not just the main stem. I'm talking about the waters that go by, the tributaries and even distributaries down here. And you'll get a lot of blank stares, because that's what we should be working for, is not just reduce nutrients, but to reduce them to a point where, quite frankly, it's close to background levels. I mean, there should be nutrients in many of these waters, but not at the doses we're getting. And also, if people understand that that is part of the cost of this cycle of, quite frankly, production agriculture. I mean, in Iowa, municipalities are having to denitrify their water before it can be used for public water supply. They're not allowed to pursue legal remedies against the ag sector because they're immune under state law. So we're essentially we're deciding that essentially certain users should subsidize certain other producers. Those things all need to be part of this story, and Matt, I think it does a nice job of laying it out. So again, my job is to try to help people understand the legal architecture of this. But just as the rest of you, I'm still trying to figure out what it is, we should be working toward. But because I can promise you that if it's not for the people on this call, you're waiting for a cavalry that's not, that's not planning to show up.
Mark, that was, I won't say enlightening. It was enlightening. It was not encouraging. Knowing that there is a cavalry somewhere, but we'll have to be it. That is a call to arms, if you will. Our next speaker will be Rebecca Malpass, again, back from the Healthy Gulf, to talk about a different part of their work, I think.
Hey everyone, good afternoon. Thank you, Pat, and thank you to the Mississippi River Network for hosting us and hosting our Fertilize to Death pollution project. It was a pleasure to work with Matt on this. It was months of research, diving in and trying to put it all together. I think we both enjoyed putting it together and hope that it's useful to everyone as well and compelling. There are so many factors and issues around fertilizer manufacturing and use. It's definitely a multifaceted set of processes. But what I would really like to focus on is drinking water quality in Louisiana and New Orleans particularly. As Matt mentioned, about 42% of our nation's water systems drain directly into the Mississippi River and the Gulf of Mexico. The Mississippi River itself is over 2,300 miles long. If you combine that with the Ohio River and its tributaries, the Missouri River and its tributaries, that's tens of thousands of miles of waterways total that drain here. And many parishes, including Orleans Parish, where I live, where Matt lives, where I think Mark lives, we get our drinking water from the Mississippi River. One of two surface water intakes that we have in our parish is about 20 blocks from my house, actually. And it's adjacent to a street that is ironically and aptly named Industrial Avenue, just to give you an idea. We have some of the oldest water infrastructure in the country, about 100 to 120 years old. And we're losing our wetlands as well, about a football field per hour, and wetlands help us absorb nutrient pollution. So with all this in mind, it's really hard to keep up with the amount of flooding and pollution that we're seeing down here. Many times the system will fail after a storm, which we have many of, and the city will have to issue a boil water advisory, which essentially means that we have to boil our drinking water or have to boil our water before drinking it. And it's probably not a good idea to brush our teeth with it. Showering is iffy. And this happens several times a year, actually. New Orleans is trying to update that system, but that costs money, to be honest. And that money usually comes from ratepayer pockets and federal tax dollars and state tax dollars. Our water bills are some of the highest in the nation because we have to clean our water, which ends up being about a 7-step process from coagulation to disinfection to filtration, et cetera. And we pay for that. Even on a personal level, on an anecdotal level, even after cleaning, my tap water still emits high concentrations of total dissolved solids, which can include fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides and everything that we've been talking about with our presentation. According to the Environmental Working Group, 12 different contaminants in New Orleans tap water, including nitrates and radium, exceed their recommended health guidelines. So nutrient pollution is a large part of the clean drinking water conversation, particularly for New Orleans, but all up and down the Mississippi River. This is not exclusive to New Orleans specifically, although we do bear a brunt of it. And I really think what I want to drive home is that's why it's important to have legislation like the Mississippi River Restoration and Resilience Initiative that we've been talking about these past few days to help mitigate water pollution and also lower costs for people. There are definitely environmental benefits, but there are economic and public health benefits as well. So.
The moderator is not used to having someone get done quickly. So it's like, oh, wait, get my stuff put together. Thank you for that, Rebecca. And I just want to commend you and Matt also on the quality of that map and the level of detail and information you have on that. That's an astonishing amount of information. And I'm looking forward to giving that to my classes and asking them very difficult exam questions and so forth out of the map. You're going to make life miserable for a bunch of our students up here in Minnesota, but that's okay, right? That's what we do. Our final speaker today is is Ward Wilson from the Kentucky Waterways Alliance. Ward?
Hello, I'm Ward Wilson. I'm the Executive Director of Kentucky Waterways Alliance. We're a statewide organization in Kentucky focused on waterways. Our mission is to protect, restore, and celebrate the waterways of Kentucky. All of Kentucky drains to the Mississippi River eventually. Most of it drains to the Ohio, which obviously goes into the Mississippi. So we've been a part of Mississippi River Network and another closely affiliated group, Mississippi River Collaborative, for many years, knowing that we need to work regionally on some of these issues. Even though we're not too close to the Gulf, people here are very concerned about the Gulf hypoxia zone. And so another group that we're a part of that is affiliated with a lot of these efforts is the National Wildlife Federation. They really give us some power in Washington, D.C. and regionally with legislators. They're really leading as MRN is, and as we're trying to on the Mississippi River Restoration Resilience Initiative. So we're very concerned about it. In Kentucky, nutrient pollution is not being addressed very quickly. Much as Mark said, there's kind of a tendency to argue about the data. There's a lot of that. Well, we don't have enough data yet to know, and to really argue about the problem, which is staring us in the face. We've had events canceled on the Ohio River because of harmful algal blooms. It's affecting drinking water at places. It's affecting recreation, and I'm sure it's just going to get worse. So some of the things we do to address it is on policy, we advocate for better regulation, more effective regulations and programs. It's been a tough few years here and nationally, but we've got an administration in Kentucky that's a little more interested in making some headway on it. So they're working on the nutrient strategy that I will say is nearly 10 years old, still in draft, but we are seeing movement on that. So we're advocating for numeric criteria, which would drive permitting and other things, but we're also advocating for riparian protection. We have some projects where we do things like fence cattle out of streams and provide water sources. We're doing some septic tank removals and on a project in Eastern Kentucky that's primarily targeted at fecal coliform and E. coli, but it's also obviously nutrients come from that source too. So, and in all of that, we try to do a lot of education and we work with watershed groups. So don't know that I have one big, great answer to dealing with this, but we are working up here in the headwaters, trying to help be a part of the solution instead of the problem in the Gulf. That's all I've got, Pat.
That's plenty, thank you. It's always good to hear from folks from around the whole region. We have a little bit of time. If some of the rest of you who are not on the panel would like to raise a question, put your hand up. In the reactions, there's a raise hand function, or you can type something in the chat and I can pull it out and read it. If you'd like to ask something more directly to one of the panelists, then we can do that, or we can sort of open it more generally. Yes, Albert Ettinger.
I just wanted to make people aware and ask you if you're aware that we did file another petition, like the petition that was mentioned by Professor Davis, only this one was focused on the Ohio River, and a number of groups, the Mississippi River Collaborative, Sierra Club, and some other groups signed on a petition to try and get numeric water quality standards and a TMDL for the Ohio River. To the extent we could get that, that would also, of course, lessen the amount of fertilizer and other pollution coming downstream, it would be hoped. something we learned in the process of drafting that was that there are a number of point sources that are still important in the Ohio River that are not receiving even what we would consider the bare bones treatment for phosphorus. For example, the city of Cincinnati doesn't have phosphorus limits that they've had in all the Great Lakes cities since the 70s. So I guess that's not exactly a question for panelists, except to ask you to support our effort, and also to ask you if you were aware of these other things, of this Ohio River petition, which we are trying to push on US EPA now.
Is there a Ohio River consortium or coalition? Is there like a Ohio River Keeper or something? Maybe I could, to pull up, or somebody could pull up and we could put their website in the chat.
There are a number of groups that are addressing the Ohio River, but I will say the Ohio River even less has gotten even less coordinated focus than the Mississippi River. It does have Orsanco, which is a government body, which was really ahead of its time in 1950. It's not 1950 anymore, though, and Orsanco hasn't moved on much from what its task was in 1950. No, we've got a number of groups that are working together, but on this, it's on an ad hoc basis. And I'd say that's a problem, and maybe people can comment on that. A number of the key states in the Mississippi Basin or the Ohio River Basin actually have their, they're looking in the other direction. In Illinois, we get all sorts of concern, in Chicago at least, about Lake Michigan, but the Mississippi just doesn't matter. It's the same story in Wisconsin and to some degree Minnesota. They're much more concerned about the Great Lakes. Pennsylvania is all excited. The upper Ohio River states are very concerned about Chesapeake Bay, but they see the Ohio River as their, the place to flush the stuff. So that's an ongoing problem, I think, with the whole Mississippi Basin.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Appreciate your insight there. Yeah, thank you. Ward.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Yeah, that's very true. There's been some talk, I'd say, about and some effort towards creating a better network of people who work in the Ohio on the environmental side. National Wildlife Federation, which I mentioned we're an affiliate of, has been talking to some foundations, and we've been talking with Penn Future and other states to see if we can form that. One thing, and the model for that, National Wildlife Federation has a great waters program, so they have one in the Great Lakes and in different areas. The Ohio River is a working river, as Albert said, and there's worse ways to say that, but basically it's pretty industrial. It's not, people don't go on vacation to the Ohio River. They don't see it as a place that they know and love and have family memories of, except there are a lot of people who do get out on the river. It's not that bad, as like what I like to say, which isn't very inspiring, I guess. It's not that bad. But yeah, there are a lot of people. There's a group within Orsanco or affiliated with Orsanco called the Water Organizations Advisory Committee. And that's sort of the most organized, I guess, our groups get in terms of dealing with the Ohio. So we're still trying.
Good to know. Thank you. Now, a word just to both of you folks. In the reactions, the hand raised is one that you have to actually take down. If it's a clap or something like that, it goes away, but you have to actually take your hand down, or else I'll think that we still haven't called on you. Misa.
Thanks, Pat. I'm curious if our panelists can talk a little bit about the state nutrient reduction strategies. So I know each of you are from different states. What are your state's nutrient reduction strategies like? And then how does it work, or doesn't it work? And then the relationship between the state nutrient reduction strategies and the Gulf Hypoxia Task Force. Just some light questions.
As I say, just a simple set of questions there.
Go first, Matt.
All right. Yeah, I'm gonna talk about. I'll talk about Louisiana. Then I'm actually gonna mention something about Iowa. The short answer, Misa, at least in my humble researched opinion, is they are not very effective in that the nutrient reduction strategies, you know, each of the states, Mississippi River states, has developed a nutrient reduction strategy, but by and large, they are all voluntary. They are all pretty much unfunded, and they are, most of them don't even have actual reduction goals. You know, in like, this is how much pollution we're actually going to reduce. And regretfully, even the ones that do have goals aren't doing real well with that. Let's see, I'm trying to pull something up right now. That Iowa, and I just I'm going to share my screen real fast just to show y'all. There you go. So Iowa Environmental Council, great organization, put out a report recently. And here's just a little infographic of what they were doing. So one of the goals is they set was 12.6 million acres of cover crops. In 2017, they only achieved 760 acres. Or 760,000. So basically, at the rate that they're increasing them, it would take 93 years to reach that goal. Their goal of wetlands would take 913 years, and bioreactors, which are these basically putting your water through wood chips before it goes out, that soaks up a lot of the nutrients actually, it would take 31,000 years at the rate that they're installing these to actually meet the goals that they've set. So, and I can put a link to this in a second, but it's, to me at least, it's extremely obvious that these nutrient reduction strategies are not going to get us to where we need to be. And that's what I'm seeing, you know, in Louisiana, as well as, you know, from hearing from colleagues up and down the river. But I'd love to hear from the other, from Ward or Mark. And
well, let me say something quickly about Louisiana, as I think it typifies the biggest problem here. I mean, first of all, Louisiana's contribution to nutrient loading is relatively small, in part because of the hydrology of the state. And that's what the state focuses on. They don't focus on how much is actually in the river that arrives here. And so our nutrient reduction strategy, in fact, to the extent it actually is called a reduction strategy and not just a management strategy, that was the single thing my team's comments achieved to the last nutrient reduction strategy amendments. Nothing substantive. And I think this shows the danger of going at it state by state, because each state is measuring, like, so what problem am I solving if I set a metric for my state? It doesn't think about the exported problem, you know. And so that's why I think it is critical to do, again, what y'all are doing, which is think about this as the nation's river, you know, and nation writ large, not just for humans, but for, you know, all the things that make this place up. Because that is what it's going to take. And again, my biggest worry about setting TMDLs piecemeal is that we then set things in stone that can't be undone. I'm not suggesting for a moment to stop what you're doing, yeah, but I do think the more coordinated it can be, and that's really where, you know, I think EPA probably is going to have to be pressured to play a greater oversight role. Because otherwise we will come up with solutions that look like solutions, but really don't make a dent in the fundamental problem, either on the back end or in avoiding it. Because that's, again, we have this problem for reasons. We have to understand what those reasons are and then change them.
Mark, Matt, Rebecca, Ward, I want to thank you so much for your contributions. This is very enlightening. You've taught us that the time is now to do something and that we are the people to do it, and that the scale of which we have to act is greater than the scale that is what's right in front of our face. That's very salutary. I want to turn this over the last couple of minutes to Misa, who probably has a couple more things to add to us on behalf of the network itself. Misa?
Thank you, Pat, and thank you all of our participants for being here for this really important conversation, and all of our MRN member organizations who are here represented by our panelists. So thank you to Healthy Gulf. Thank you to Kentucky Waterways Alliance. Thank you to Pat from University of Minnesota and our steering committee member. And thank you to Mark from Tulane, important member of our policy committee. So I couldn't have scripted a better segue to, again, really invite each and every one of you to take action through this public petition that is about a holistic vision, a dedicated federal program for the Mississippi River, because as we just heard from our brilliant panelists and the discussion here, that this is a super wicked problem, as they say, that will need an unprecedented response. And that's what we are really working on through this new vision. And we want to invite each and every one of you who benefit from all of the gifts of our river, from, you know, whether it is recreation, whether it is drinking water, whether it is birding. Let's do what we need to do to protect the river. And if you've already signed the petition, I am deeply grateful. Michael, Kelly, and I from the MRN team are literally refreshing this petition every 10 minutes because we're just so grateful for everyone to be part of this. And I would just invite everyone to think of someone that you know, a friend, a family member, a neighbor who shares that care and interests for the river and our communities that depend on it for so many different gifts. And I would invite you to just share this public petition with that person that you know and help amplify this call for action. And in addition to that, as I said at the outset, if you are interested in joining us for another one of our 40+ River Days of Action events, please check out onemississippi.org. We have events every day, and we have a lunch and learn just like this, but on different topics tomorrow and on Thursday. So we'd love to see you again. And with that, I will just close out. Again, deep gratitude for all of our panelists for being here, for the collaboration of all of our Mississippi River Network member organizations, and each and every one of you for all the things that you already do to protect our river. Thanks, everybody.